Tonight we are very excited to welcome our fellow parishioner, Kristina Bloomsburg, as she presents All Good Comes From You, O Lord. 3 amazing experiences from her life, how approaching the Lord with humility and surrender led to healing, mission, and an increased faith. Kristina is the assistant editor and designer of our diocesan magazine, New Earth. Please help me welcome Kristina Bloomsburg.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming here. As Tom said, my name is Kristina, and just a little background about me before I share the 3 stories that I plan to share with you today. I've lived here in Fargo for 10 years, and I've been a parishioner here during that time. And like Tom said, if you read the New Earth magazine, you'll recognize my name in there. And that's been a big part of my experience here in Fargo. And I've been married to my wonderful husband, Sam, for almost a year. Coming up, first anniversary is on Sunday, so I've made it a whole year. Oh, thanks. And I'd like to share with you 3 stories tonight, and one of them is of healing, one of them is mission, and one of them is of an increased faith. And before I get into that, just a little bit of background. I grew up on a dairy farm near Sauk Center, Minnesota, with my 4 siblings and my parents. I went to a Catholic elementary school and a public middle school, high school, and my family went to Mass every Sunday. And I grew up with a sense that being Catholic was not only important, but it was smart, because the church had been around for 2,000 years, so if you were going to follow anything, that seemed to be the smart option to me. And also, the moral teachings of the church, the 10 Commandments, that seemed like that was the surest way to live a very practical and a very peaceful life. So, for example, by not working on Sundays, doing any extra farm work, that made Sunday a day to look forward to, but then also we were well rested for Monday and Tuesday and the days to come. And honoring my father and mother cut out the drama that my friends seem to all have with their parents, and so I had a more peaceful life. And then all the other things, by not gossiping, by not stealing or being jealous, I was just more grateful for the things that I had. And I could be generally liked by my classmates as well. So following the 10 Commandments just made logical sense. And even though I found my religious classes kind of boring, these rules were, the commandments were the things that, they were enough during my middle school and my high school years that I trusted that the church knew what she was talking about. And while it doesn't sound very flashy, I realize now that this trust in the church and her commandments is actually a very great blessing and a grace. So before leaving college at the University of Minnesota in Morris, I was aware that there were many people my age that left the church, and so I decided that I was not going to be one of them. But I also planned, I planned to attend Mass every Sunday, but I wasn't going to be a freak about it, that was what I was going to do, and not a whole lot above that. Since I was a pretty quiet and agreeable kind of kid, that people would joke that I was going to be a nun someday because I was kind of goody two-shoes, and so I didn't want that same reputation to follow me when I went to college. It was like going to the youth groups, and I would be like, oh, you're volunteering for the church. I'm like, no, that's my parents telling me to volunteer for the church. That wasn't my choice. So I was not interested in that reputation following me into college. So I got to college, and I loved it there. I made friends right away, many that I'm still friends with today. Morris had an array of very nerdy clubs that I was really interested in. There was a fencing club. I thought that was really cool. And there were board game groups and writing groups, all these things that I didn't have in high school that I was really interested in being a part of. And so I was... Ultimately, these groups were fine, but I found that none of them were very welcoming, and I had this kind of wide-eyed sort of like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to have so many opportunities, all these new things. And then honestly, they were all really boring and really lame, and I didn't make any friends there at all. But like, I had friends on my floor, on my dorm floor, and some of them went to the Newman Center. And also my sister at the time was one of the peer ministers. And so after about 2 months, I found myself there, and sort of to get my sister off my back, but also because I knew that there was something there, because I had already experienced a very good upbringing of knowing that the church had something for me. So Newman, when I got there, it immediately became my second home, and I was never tempted to turn back. People were always excited to see me, and it was very obvious that people had a joy outside of themselves and a hope in things that I had never really experienced before from people my own age. And I quickly learned that actually what remains pretty much one of the most important things I've learned about the faith is that there's more. That there's more to learn, there's always more there's always more that the Lord will give you in prayer, there's always more to learn in Scripture, and that was not something I really knew growing up. It's like, oh, I know the rosary, and I know the things, but it wasn't until I went to the Newman Center that I realized there was so much in the heart that I had yet to experience. So throughout my college years, I attended almost every retreat and event the Newman Center had, and if people wanted to think that I was going to be a nun, that seemed like a pretty small price to pay. So this leads me to my first story, where God provided a very profound healing in my life, and it was the beginning of my third year of college, and my boyfriend at the time and I ended our relationship, and I was devastated, and I knew it was for the better, and I had no desire for the relationship to continue, but I was hurt very deeply, and ultimately, I was very confused, and I just felt stupid that I had let this relationship go as long as I did. And so what came from there is I can be very practical when it comes to things like this. So I'm like, okay, I'm hurting, and I got to fix that. So here's my plan. I got Kristina's Path to Healing program. It's all set up. So it's like, all right, step 1, we got share with your friends how you're doing, and make sure you have their support. And then step 2, make sure you do kind things for yourself, like go out to eat and go shopping, go get a haircut, go read some fun books, just, treat yourself. And then step 3 is don't mope around, be around other people, especially when you're feeling sad. And step 4 is to pray. And step 5 is just to keep doing that until you get on with your life. And so, honestly, I think these steps are not bad. I mean, they're pretty good. Because when we're suffering, it's important not to suffer alone, and opening our heart is a good way to get closer to our friends and to receive empathy from other people. And I know that some of my friendships were stronger for them supporting me through this. And it's always good to take a little extra time for rest when you're struggling. Because, really, no matter how long we've been Catholic or how long we've been practicing, or how many rosaries that we've prayed or anything, we do still, in fact, need a Savior. And that was the thing that I was missing, because I was praying, but it was sort of a Lord help me, kind of in a generic sort of sense. So I repeated those steps to healing over and over, and I just could not get on with my life. And months later, I was still just as miserable as I was that first week after the breakup, and I just felt like something was wrong with me. I felt that I was crazy. And I was really starting to hate myself for not being happier. And when really I had everything I wanted. I didn't want that relationship to continue. I knew that everything was moving forward, was going to be good. I was just miserable, and I didn't understand. So a day came where I skipped a class, which was a big deal for me. And so I was just so upset, and I was so angry that I just couldn't deal with being in a class. And so I was living at the Newman Center at the time as a peer minister. So I went home, and the doors of the chapel were open. And so it wasn't a conscious thought. I just went in the chapel and had this thought of like, okay, Jesus, like, I got words for you. And so I went in there, and like I had been praying, but this was different in that I just laid it all out there, and it was something like, okay, Jesus, I am miserable for no reason. Like so much time has passed. I don't want anything from that relationship. I'm just exhausted. I don't understand where you are, and I hear all these stories that you're God, that you provide healing, that you love me, and I don't see where this is going. I'm living here at the Newman Center, and I'm supposed to be that person that is inviting other people in, is being joyful and hopeful in what I experienced when I was a freshman, and I'm just not that person, and I hate that, and I want to be that for other people. And so I can't fix this. I can't fix it. You're going to have to fix it. I'm done trying. And in my heart, it was almost like this dare for Jesus of like, what are you going to do? You know, are you really going to step in? Are you really going to do something? And I fell asleep in the chapel, and I was in there for hours. I don't know. It was most of the afternoon. And during that time, each of my roommates they came back from class, and they saw that I was in there, and then they went on their way. And later, when I woke up, they were all like, are you okay? Like, how long have you been in there? And when they asked me how I was doing, I said that I was doing fine. And it was the first time that I actually said that I was fine, and it was actually true, that I actually felt good. And it was surprising to me. I was like, wow, like I'm actually okay. I'm doing okay. And it wasn't that, everything was hunky-dory after that. I was completely healed, but it was the absolute turning point. It was very, very obvious that the Lord had healed me in that time. And I don't know why in that, like, what was that moment? Was it a certain kind of openness to the Lord that I didn't have before? What was that time there? But that was, ultimately I learned that, to be vulnerable in that way with the Lord was a door that he could enter that I hadn't necessarily opened before. And I also learned that the rules can't save me, that I was creating these rules to follow, and that ultimately that wasn't it, that it was Jesus that was the one that could really heal my heart. So my second story for today, several years later, so it's 2017, and this was a time when God gave me a mission. At the time, I often found myself at the Adoration Chapel here at the cathedral downtown, and I would just come exhausted. I don't know why. I was just like, Lord, I don't know. Like, life is good, I guess, but I'm just really tired, and I need some direction in my life. Should I stay in Fargo? Should I leave? Should I get a different job? Should I discern religious life? Like, I don't know. There's all these things. I don't really feel called to anything. But what is currently happening, I don't feel like is enough. And so I had this prayer over and over of just always being invited to come to the cathedral. And it was interesting that I would just be running errands, and it's like, go to the cathedral. Okay. And I go visit a friend for coffee, and afterwards go to the cathedral, it was very, very clear that he wanted me there, and I would go there, and it would just be like, okay. And then there wasn't anything flashy about those times, but I kept going, and I would pray for some kind of direction, and I would always leave with sort of a like spiritual thumbs up, like, you're doing good, like, okay. And there came a day where that really wasn't enough, where I really wanted something more to do. And it's like I as a single person at the time, like I'm looking for a mission, really. It's like I have a job and I have friends that I'm with, but other than that, like, what else do you want me to do with my time? I just want, is there a vocation out there for me that I'm not seeing? Is there some kind of mission out there that I'm missing? And I found myself just staring at the monstrance and wishing my life could be like the candles that were around it, because they didn't question God's desires the desires that God gave them. They didn't feel trapped the way that I did. They didn't worry that they weren't good enough. And this story about them started to form in my mind, and just all these things of like, okay, before coming to the chapel, they were probably in a dark box somewhere, which would be kind of sad for a candle because they should be lit and they should provide light. And, how happy would they be with the day that they could finally be lit, especially if they were like praising Jesus on the altar. So there was that day in the chapel. I was there for a little while, and I wrote a draft of a children's story. And I had no idea what I would do with it. I'd never even thought about writing a children's story at this point, so I'm just like, okay, that was fun. And so naturally, it just lived in my drawer for 2 years, and it just sat there. But every time I went to the chapel, Jesus would have be like, remember that candle? And I thought, okay. Eventually, the promptings got a little stronger every time, and so I thought, okay, I have to do something with this. I don't know. So I started showing it to my friends and family, and they all really liked it. They said that I should move forward with it, see what happens. And so I decided, okay, I'll show it to some strangers. So I found some people. There was a Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators group in Fargo. I don't know if they still exist, but they did at the time. And so I met with them, and I was super nervous because it was a Catholic book, and so I had no idea what they would do with it, if they would just be quiet and not have any comments or what. But it was a great blessing to be there, because I read the story out, and I made one lady cry, and that was a great compliment. So she shared how the story reminded her of Jesus' love and how much she appreciated her church community. And someone else said that the story spoke of the gift of faith, and they all had these different comments, and they had all these different perspectives of this book that I had never even thought of. And the reactions showed me how that there was something here that I didn't do, that God was really in it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to move forward with this and see what happens. So I submitted the story to several Catholic publishers, and I got some rejections right away, because the some of the places they get 3,000 proposals a week, and then they publish maybe 3 or 4 a year. So it's just like, there's too many. Sorry. Okay. And as I was getting these rejections, I'm like, I don't care. That's fine. I'll figure it out. And I actually realized that I really wanted a certain kind of style. So I'm like, I'm going to find my own illustrator. So I found an illustrator, and there's the Catholic Illustrator's Guide. And so that had a website, and I saw somebody who had her artwork on there that I just fell in love with it. And there was a picture of Mary holding Jesus, and Mary and Jesus were both just had this great joy on their face. And so I emailed the illustrator, and as a bit of a side note, like, I later told my illustrator that this picture was the reason why I contacted her, and she's like, that wasn't me. I don't have that photo. I didn't make that. I'm like, well, your name was attributed to it, so, because I asked her to send it to me at one point. It's like, I really loved it. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So anyway, that was the Lord's work there. And so I contacted her. She was a delight, and I was very nervous though too, because I'm like, oh, this is going to be expensive, and I hadn't really mentally prepared how much I was willing to spend. And so she was great, because she was so joyful and she was so patient with me. And I just went back to the cathedral over and over, and I just received this grace and this peace to move forward. And so Virginia is my illustrator's name, and she gave me a timeline and a budget, and really was very, very helpful. Her joy brought me forward to keep moving. And so I sent that first batch of money off to her, 50% of it up front, and that was just the most freeing experience ever. It was like, oh, sweet, okay, now I'm ready, I'm in, we're just going to move forward. I can't back out anymore. And I had never really experienced a peace like that before, of like getting on a roller coaster and just being like, okay, God, here we go. I don't know where this is going, but I'm holding on. So So we agreed with what the characters were going to look like, and then it was time to design the church, and Virginia asked me if I had a preference for the architect style, and to my own surprise, I didn't. And in hindsight, I could have just used St. Anthony's or the cathedral, but I didn't even think about it, so I didn't. So I was just very happy with how the characters turned out. I'm like, Virginia, whatever you do, that sounds great. And so she said that she had an idea, and she would tell me the story behind it after she had the draft done. And I was excited about that. Like, okay, there's a story behind it. That sounds great. And so Virginia used a church from where she was living. She lives in Santiago, Chile. And the church that she used was severely damaged by a fire set by protesters just a couple weeks prior. And so she sent me the pictures of her illustration and then the pictures of the church after it was burned down, or not completely burned, but the scorched kind of pictures. And it was just like heartbreaking in just this weird way. Like, I don't know this church, I don't know these people, but like it really just broke my heart that because it was just very gruesome, you know, like you see a church and you see it burn down, it's sad, but then you see the pictures where it was, you know, protesters that are like taking selfies with the statues that are burning behind them, and it was just this just crazy like evil that was in there, and it just really broke my heart that Virginia was experiencing this in her community. But I, at the same time, was also amazed because it was just weeks prior to when we started to do the design, and so it really just felt like God's timing, that God wanted this church to live on in this book. So later that year, I learned that the church was burned down completely, that the protesters came back, and they provided, there was a steeple in the news report that I saw, so you could see the steeple like crumbling down, and it was just awful. And I remember I emailed Virginia right away, and I was offering her prayers for her and for the people there, and just her response was beautiful, so I want to share that with you. She said, "They burned what was left of it along with another beautiful church. This is truly demonic. To be honest, I don't have the stomach to watch the news. But I do feel I was given the opportunity to honor that church twice, by the reparation mass after the first attack, and then by illustrating it for you in your book before they burned it. I am so happy it will live in your book with your candle. Thank you so much for your prayers. I'm praying for you and the U.S. as well. It's exciting to fight the good fight in such hard times." And I think it was that last line that really struck me, that her positivity that attracted me to work with her. It was just like, it's still there. That she has this joy that is contagious, and it's just amazing to me. So it really just blew my mind that God planted this seed for a story in Fargo and then connected it across the world in Chile. There was no way I could plan for that. And so anyway, Candle's Great Feast, it launched in March of 2021. And the more feedback I received, the more convinced I became that God was in the center of it. And I was just so very thankful that God had this mission for me. It was just not something that I was expecting. It was completely out of the blue. And not really, I felt very alone in it in a way, because I didn't know anybody who had done a self-publish of a children's book before. But God's presence was in all these little steps along the way. And you know, I tell this story, and it's like, what's the lasting effect? It's like, I don't know. Why does God work the way he does? I don't know. But ultimately, the whole process, it really just taught me that God offers us such great support and joy when we leap into the void, not knowing what will happen. Because he'll catch us. And he just wants us to trust him that he'll catch us. And not only that he'll catch us, but that he'll launch us back up so we can trust him again. Anyway, I do have copies of the book tonight, just for the record. Anyway, my final story tonight is about how God very clearly answered a decades-long prayer and increased my faith along the way. In January of 2022, I met my now husband, Sam, here in Fargo. And within about 2.5 months, I was convinced he was the one. But it wasn't just the fun and the butterflies in my stomach that convinced me. It was actually in the midst of a tragedy that I knew that I wanted to be with Sam for better or worse. That March, Sam flew back to Spokane to be with his father, Pete, before he had a triple bypass surgery. And I was not under the impression that Sam would be back for very long, but I was still sad in my own selfishness to see him go. And so while he accompanied his father, I really wanted to be a part of that in a way. And so I went about my week in Fargo, but I was praying for him, and I donated blood the day of the surgery, and as a way of prayer and fasting. And I was very hopeful for a healthy recovery for him. Unfortunately, Pete had a stroke shortly after the surgery and passed away just a few days later. And those days were really an emotional ride. I so wanted to meet Pete. I hadn't had a chance to. We met via Zoom very briefly. And so I felt cheated that I couldn't meet him in person. And I was very grateful that Sam was able to see him before the surgery. And Sam was very sweet during this time. He was always consoling me whenever we were talking on the phone. He'd console me when I was trying to console him. And it was actually during these conversations that this was the moment where I knew I wanted to marry him. And he told me the story about when his dad's communication, his level of communication was to squeeze one for yes and to squeeze twice for no. And even though they weren't really sure if he could understand them. But when Sam was in the room with him, he mused out loud at one point, wondering if he should call me, and Pete squeezed once for yes. So I didn't want to read too much into it, but I hoped it was enough that he might hope that I'd be his daughter-in-law someday. And I prayed to God that if I wasn't to meet him in person, that God would show me his approval. And it was actually a really kind of a strange prayer because I had no idea how God would answer that. It's like, I can't just fly to Spokane. I don't know how this is going to work. And sometimes God won't answer a prayer right away, but sometimes he will. And so this was one of those times. And this time he answered my prayer that evening, and I had this dream that I was in the hospital room with Pete. It was just the two of us. And while Pete was clearly at the end of his life, he just had this smile, and he was radiant. That there was this light coming from him. It was like he was already one step in heaven. And then he squeezed my hand once to say yes. And I was truly assured in that moment that not only did Pete love me and wanted me to marry his son, but that God would soon welcome him into heaven as well. The summer prior to that incident, my uncle and godfather, Lauren, he also passed away that summer. And several weeks after he died, I was praying for the repose of his soul, and I thought, okay, Lauren, when you get to heaven, I don't know if you're there yet, but when you get there, can you let Jesus know that I'm ready to meet my husband now? I've asked him, and I've prayed lots of novenas, and I've asked the saints, but you're part of my family. I don't know if that makes a difference, but maybe if you ask him, that will convince him that I want to meet my husband now. And Sam moved to Fargo that same summer. While we didn't meet until the winter, I think Lauren too had his saying in bringing Sam and me together. And it really makes me wonder now to what extent those who've gone before us still breathe life in the world, and how deeply do their prayers affect our lives. Again, I don't know, but I haven't lost that many people close to me, but just there's something in that prayer and that assurance that Lauren did speak for me, and I'm very convinced of that. Soon after, soon after Sam flew back from Washington, we talked about getting married, and I was super excited. But I was also a little worried that we were taking things a little too quick, and I hate to say it, but I kind of wanted another sign. And every day I felt this prodding from the Holy Spirit to pray for a rose. I'd heard about people asking for St. Therese's intercession to receive a rose, usually in confirmation for taking a certain direction of their life or for not taking said direction. So, for example, I heard about a story about there was a discouraged seminarian thinking about leaving the seminary, and then he prayed for a rose. And as he was sitting in front of a statue of Mary, a religious sister placed a bouquet of roses in Mary's arms. And I also heard a story about a friend of mine who was considering switching colleges and then prayed to receive a purple rose specifically. And shortly after that, she ventured into a church basement, which was decorated for an event with purple roses. So anyway, I thought that was all very nice, but I was very skeptical that that was a thing that God would do for me, mostly because I didn't need a yellow rose to verify whether or not I should marry Sam. I was pretty convinced that I should. And not receiving a yellow rose wasn't really going to stop me, but since I had already received a pretty powerful yes, I knew that I had this prodding that God was asking me to do this, and it was just like he was saying, I have a gift for you, but I want you to ask for it, because it's not just about receiving some consolation that you don't need, but increasing your faith. And but you have to be bold in asking for the gift. So I asked for a yellow rose, and I prayed the novena to St. Therese of Lisieux, and I guess I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I did it sort of half-heartedly because I was just nervous that it wasn't going to happen. I was afraid of being left down, which in hindsight is kind of silly because God invited me to receive this gift, so of course he's going to bring it to me. So, but there was still that part of me that was just scared that God was going to hold out on me. So just a few days after praying the novena, it was Administrative Assistance Appreciation Day, and every year I forget about it. And every year the admin assistants at the pastoral center, they get a bouquet of roses, or not roses, bouquet of flowers. And so every year there'll be just a day that comes where there's just 10 to 12 bouquets just on the desk, and I think, oh, what are these for? And it's like, oh, it's that day. Okay. And so each one has a name on it, and I looked at all of them, and I found mine, and mine was the only one that had a yellow rose in it. So God did not hold out on me. So to sum up, I guess I've learned that I don't understand God's goodness. Sometimes I see it in people, I see it in the adventures of the world, but it seems to me that where I see it the most is through suffering or after a period of suffering. And you just wouldn't think that the goodness and suffering would go together, but that seems to be it. That seems to be where God's goodness shines the brightest. So my prayer for you is to keep going, that whatever you're going through, don't rush it, don't squash it down, don't pretend it's not valid, don't pretend that it's not that big of a deal because other people are suffering more than you. But call out to Jesus. Hand him your burdens, share your heart with him. Even if your pain doesn't make sense, give it to him. That he has a plan for you, he has a plan for your life, and I don't know where God's goodness is for you. I don't know what that looks like, but it's there. And so I just encourage you to look for it, to be attentive to it, and if we keep seeking it, we'll certainly find it. And that's enough out of me. Thank you.